Today's startup offers an inclusive and unbiased stage for startup founders to shine and share their entrepreneurship and startup journeys to inspire international audiences on tech news around the world. Today's startup features Jim Chu, founder CEO, Untapped Global. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So, can you give us a brief introduction of your background and what inspired or motivated you to start your entrepreneurship or startup journey?
Yeah, so I've been in the tech world for the last 30 years, pretty much. In the 90s, I went to Stanford and graduated with bachelor's and master's, and like everybody did in the 90s, went straight into tech, but worked with large companies, Cisco Systems at first, and then did a few startups. But really, my journey started for real, I would say, in the last 10 years in terms of really focusing on emerging markets. And even though the companies I started in the 2000s were, your typical digital media company and some media technology companies, what really inspired me in the last 10 years is how much entrepreneurship is happening in places like Africa, in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, and so many other places. We usually think about startups and we think about Silicon Valley. And I think what's happened in the last decade or two is that because of the cloud, because of a globalizing marketplace, more entrepreneurs around the world can get access to global marketplaces. And that creates opportunities for entrepreneurs that didn't exist, entrepreneurs in different parts of the world that didn't exist even 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. So I'm just excited that there is just so much potential to be unlocked in different parts of the world. And so we created a company to really focus on unlocking that potential, helping entrepreneurs access funding, access CapEx financing, access equity financing, so they can create global companies and really play at the same level, same playing field as American startups.
That's fantastic. So, can you elaborate more then on the current few projects that you're embarking on, and just give us more details so that we know what exactly you're working on?
Yeah, so there's two main initiatives that I find personally very exciting and that we're very focused on as a company. One is a different approach to financing in emerging markets that we think unlocks a massive marketplace. We call it smart asset financing. And it's a model where we use data and technology, in particular IoT that's in assets, to be able to track assets that we finance and therefore manage the risk of financing in a way that's safer for investors, but also more scalable in terms of deploying capital to small businesses. We all know that small businesses are the lifeblood of every economy, but the problem is financing small businesses, especially in emerging markets, is really hard. You have a lot of informal companies, informal businesses, informal merchants that you don't have a balance sheet, you don't even have a credit history. So how do you finance them? And how do you make financing $5,000 or $10,000 really work? And everyone knows that getting money to these small businesses is the key to economic growth, but using the old tools for lending hasn't really led to a lot of money being deployed to small businesses. With technology and the advent of assets that are smart, i.e. assets that you can track, that changes. We can now provide an entrepreneur with a motorcycle or a car or a water treatment system or a POS device and track how they're using it and share in the revenue with them, and therefore deploy capital to them in a way that is safe for investors, gets good returns, but also we can do that scalably. And so I'm most excited about that because I think, according to the World Bank, there's a $5.2 trillion financing gap among SMEs. So we can even chip away a little bit at that gap. It makes a massive difference in the market. And me personally, I've seen some of these entrepreneurs and met some of the entrepreneurs, and the difference it makes in those economies and their lives is tremendous.
That's great. Oh, which market are you at now? You are based out of San Francisco, right?
I'm based out of San Francisco. Most of the team is based in Africa, so
Mm.
we're heavily involved in Nairobi, in Kenya, in
Mhm.
Uganda, also in South Africa. But we've done financings in Togo, in Benin, in Nigeria. We have a number of different companies there. We also have companies that we finance in Mexico. So a number of different places where the financing capital markets don't work as efficiently as in developed markets such as US and Europe.
Mhm. I look at the profile that you shared with me. You also did some water-related projects, right?
Right. In fact, that's actually how we started. So in 2010, there was a major earthquake in Haiti, and
Mm.
I went there as a volunteer. And this was kind of, I would say, it was at the very beginning of my international journey, if you will. And I thought, of course, if I want to have an impact on the world, I volunteer, right? I donate. Well, I went to Haiti and I volunteered and donated, and I donated to a water NGO and worked on the ground and just realized that aid wasn't really solving the problem. It was at best a band-aid for a lot of problems, and in many situations was actually prolonging the issue. It wasn't addressing the source of the issues. So, having spent 20 years in business, I said, "Hey, let's solve the problem with a market-driven or business-driven approach." So, with the IFC and the Dutch Development Bank (FMO), we launched a company that did decentralized water infrastructure in Haiti. And today we serve thousands of people in Haiti, and of course the doorman, the UPS delivers just as I say that. Hopefully they'll go away. Um, so we serve thousands of people today, but unfortunately we couldn't grow past a certain size. Why? Because the capital that we needed to grow was really capex financing. I needed money for stuff to build water systems, to build water infrastructure, to finance vehicles for delivering water, all of those things. And guess what? VC doesn't do that. And generally speaking, banks don't want to invest in Haiti. And so it wasn't the business that was the problem. It was where I was operating that was the problem. And it was the kind of business that I had that was the problem. Even though it was a very successful business in terms of the money it made at a unit economics level, it was almost impossible to get financing. Initially, I looked at grants, we looked at equity, and all those things just didn't fit what we wanted to do. And so we started this whole model of smart asset financing through the water model. So we started giving out water equipment to entrepreneurs in Haiti who then used that equipment to generate revenue. And with that revenue, they paid us back. And with IoT and technology, we could track what they were selling and know exactly how much they owed us. And in fact, it was all pay as you go. So if they didn't pay us, it wouldn't work. And so that model worked so well, we decided let's do this in other parts of the world. And that's when it became very, very clear that this isn't a problem, or this capital access problem is not a problem with water infrastructure. It's a problem with emerging markets. And so we really focused on let's solve this problem for emerging markets. Let's finance motorcycles. Let's finance cars. Let's finance water treatment systems. Let's finance um, liquid petroleum gas stations. Let's finance point of sale systems for small merchants. Let's finance anything that's expensive, that's hard for a small entrepreneur to get, but helps them make money. We provide that to the entrepreneurs, and using technology, we take a portion of their profits in order to pay back that financing. And so we not only started with water, but water was the inspiration for the current model of smart asset financing. And coming full circle, we intend to use the smart asset financing model to solve the water crisis.
That's interesting. At what stage are you at now?
So we have about 20 people on the team. We have 20 operating partners in, gosh, 6 or 7 countries now. We finance over 1,000 entrepreneurs on the ground. Yeah, we're this new smart asset finance model is really only about 11 months old now, but I think it's gained a lot of traction in the short amount of time that we've put it out in the market.
Seems like you're doing a great job there, and things are going pretty well for you. So, throughout your journey, not just for this project but for the previous projects too, have you gone through very hard time, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, well, gosh, I would say the entire look. So let me break up my startup life, if you will, into 2 parts. One part of
Yes.
it was when I worked in the U.S. and did tech startups in the U.S. I don't think I understood how special of an ecosystem it is in the U.S. tech markets, and the capital markets here. How easy it was to raise money, how much people were willing to risk their capital for emerging ideas. It was only, and so that was one part of my life, and I learned a lot during that whole process of running companies and what's a good investor, what's not a good investor, what does a term sheet looks like, what's a Series A look like, and so on. I wouldn't call that a difficult time in my life. I think when I started into emerging markets, I was really in frontier land. I was trying to do things that no one else had done before, and doing it in a way that fit for a tech company in Silicon Valley, but didn't necessarily fit a water company in Haiti. And so I went through so many different iterations of how to finance our capex. We initially did investor financing. I co-financed with IFC and the Dutch Development Bank to get the company started. And then we went to private equity and got some money from private equity. We realized that that model wasn't a really good fit. We went to grant funding and got some grant funding, but that model was also not a good fit. Then we went to raise money as a social enterprise from impact investors, and that model wasn't a very good fit. And that whole process, I can say, was extremely painful, because in every single step of the way, whether you're dealing with impact investors or government-based or DFIs, that they call it, development finance institutions, such as the IFC or FMO or DFC and so on, what they had available to them, the tools that they had available, just didn't fit what we needed as a company, i.e. capex financing to grow infrastructure in Haiti. And so that process essentially took 10 years of my life. But that also taught us about all the requirements of a company like my company in Haiti, of a company that was delivering essential services but needed capex financing to grow. I could say that was extremely difficult, because no matter how successful we were on the ground, no matter how smart we were, it was still an uphill battle. So one of the biggest lessons I think I learned from that is, well, first of all, 2 lessons. One is, in some ways, I had to go through that whole process to learn about the pain points of operating in emerging markets and of the broken system of financing in emerging markets to create what we created today. And second lesson is that ultimately, you have to be a user, you have to be a customer, you have to be the entrepreneur who's looking for the money, you have to be the person operating on the ground to really understand what's needed. And so I would say that those 10 years of swimming upstream and being very tired after swimming upstream really prepared us for understanding the market well enough and the needs of fast-growing companies like my company in Haiti and all the ones we serve today, so that we can create the right offering for the market today. I don't know if I answered your question, Cheryl. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you sure do. I'm actually trying to pin your company website on top. Um, so for you, what is the what is the thing that actually caused you to be so passionate about helping people, the less fortunate in places like Haiti, or right now the emerging market like Africa? Is
That's
it some
that.
influence from when you were young, or?
Well, not that simple. It's delusions of grandeur. To be serious, look, I think very few times in my life do we have the opportunity to potentially do something that has a positive impact on millions, if not even hundreds of millions of people. And when when we come up with, or when we get to a point in developing a company where we say, hey, this is working, and it can work, and it can scale, and with the right team, of course, you can't do it alone. With the right team and with the right investors, we can reach hundreds of millions. And so I see, and part of this is being on the ground and seeing how a little bit of capital goes such a long way in places like Haiti or Kenya or South Africa. That, coupled with the right model that I believe works, we think, and this is what gets me to wake up every morning, we think that we can do what I saw at small scale, i.e., helping an entrepreneur in Haiti suddenly go from being living in a very, very small house to being a global entrepreneur. We can see that happen millions of times. And I can imagine that happening in my head for a million people. And that's what motivates me. And I think we can really change the trajectory of economic development in so many countries if we fix this financing problem. So I joke it's delusions of grandeur, but indeed, if I can walk away in my life and say, look, I had a positive impact on 100 people, 1,000 people, 100,000 people, a million people, 100 million people. I don't know what better way to be purposeful in my life.
Very well done, Jim. You're so inspiring. Okay, we are early, but do you want to open the floor to the audience Q&A?
That would be great. I'd love to hear what people think and what questions they have.
Great. So, for those in the room, if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand, or you can back channel me so that I can bring you up to ask. And for those who are already on stage, can you please flash your mic to let me know who wants to ask the first question, please? Come on. Ellie, you have a question about water since you're also in relevant projects?
Yeah, that did catch my attention. I mean, first the general thing. If you could go in a little more detail into your experience with that, and maybe also say, other than the tracking that you're working on now, with benefit of hindsight, what would you do differently regarding water?
Yeah, so a little bit more background. So we essentially built water infrastructure in underserved parts of the market in Haiti. So we would go into secondary cities. I mean, the main cities had water issues, but the secondary cities had even bigger water issues. And one of the things that's happening in Haiti, but also in so many parts of the world, especially in Africa, is there is rapid population growth, and so the governments can't keep up with building the infrastructure to service everybody, and that's ultimately the issue. So I'll give you one example. One of the areas that we're in Haiti, Cabaret, 20, 30 years ago, it was a small, practically non-existent intersection of two highways, and there was hardly anyone there. These days, during the day, you have 100,000 people thriving in that community, but no infrastructure. And so we target those areas, and we build these off-grid water stations that pull groundwater and filter it and put it into 5-liter gallons, or I'm sorry, not 5-liter, 5-gallon jugs to be then distributed to corner stores all throughout the community. And there, the insight there is that, and it doesn't seem that insightful when you say it, but it is insightful in the sense that no one actually addresses this issue, is that people need to be close to the water they drink. And so if you have to get on a motorcycle or get in a car even to get your water, well, that just shrinks down your population. So by getting water closer to the consumer, both by having production locally, but also by distributing the water to the local small mom and pop shops, you get water closer to people, and therefore it makes them more accessible. And so we built this business, and it worked. We displaced most of the expensive bottled water that was coming in from the outside pretty quickly. And the unit economics were great. But when it came time to grow, to scale, it was very challenging because where do you get the money to do CapEx or capital expenditures, capital intensive expenditures? VC doesn't want to do that. VC just wants asset light, winner take all markets. Forget about Haiti even. Banks aren't going to fund a startup. So where do you go? And that was ultimately the issue. Now, if I had to go back and do it again, I think I would realize what I think we're trying to address now, which is the problem was not having enough entrepreneurs to provide water. There are loads of those. Then the market is broken. You didn't have the technical expertise for good water systems. You didn't have the financing for good water systems. And you didn't have the financing models to be able to finance the deployment of that type of infrastructure. So if I had to go back to 2012, 2013, do this again, what I would focus on more is how do we empower entrepreneurs to solve the problem? How do we empower entrepreneurs with technical expertise, with financing, and with ongoing water quality control so that they can deliver the water, consumers can get quality water, and everybody wins? Because local entrepreneurs will always solve the problem better because they know the market better if they have the technical help. Did I answer or
Definitely.
address part of your question?
Definitely, yeah.
Okay.
I enjoyed especially the last part. In a few weeks, I'd like to discuss something that I'm working on with.
Great, that'd be awesome. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Ellie.
Get in touch.
Who would like to ask the next question? If not, I will help Cami ask a question. She has a question, but she has a work call now, so she can't ask. So, Jim, the question is, hold on, let me go into the back channel. Who is your target market and what is the market size by revenue and compound annual growth rate? That is one. The other one is, what are your short and long-term goals for your startup?
So the target market, those are two big questions. The target market are basically businesses in emerging markets and developing markets that need financing for their business. So I'm not going to use, you can guess at how big that is, but I'll use the World Bank numbers. So according to the World Bank, that number is $5.2 trillion. And that's the gap that they've identified between the companies that need financing to grow and and what's actually been financed. So $5.2 trillion. Of that $5.2 trillion, about 400 billion is in Africa. Another, I forgot the numbers exactly, 200 or 300 billion in Latin America, and the rest throughout the rest of the world. So it's a massive problem to fix. And a lot of people ask, isn't that microfinance? Well, we've all heard about and seen the growth of microfinance over the years, but microfinance doesn't address this issue. Microfinance will often deal with the very lowest end of the lending ladder. And generally speaking, they're giving money away to gain customers. But once they get into the larger sums, they act like banks again. So where's your collateral? Where's your balance sheet? Can you put up your house? Well, what if I don't have a house to collateralize? I can't get a loan? Nope, you can't get a loan. So there's a big market there, and it's massive. Now, we've only been doing this for the last 11 months, but we've seen essentially in the last 6 months over 40% month-to-month growth in our revenues. And I can only speak anecdotally. If you look around different markets we're in, we're just getting requests left and right from different people who are looking for this kind of financing. CapEx financing is massive. And I would actually expand the scope of what we're doing to not just CapEx financing or asset financing. What we're essentially doing is data-driven financing. So if you look at how financing is usually done, it's done with, like I mentioned earlier, you get your balance sheet, you get your credit score, what collateral do you have? Let's get a bunch of lawyers and some legal documents to make sure that if you don't pay us, we can go after you. It's very much how it's been done for the last 500 years. The world has changed. There's a lot of data out there now. We can actually use data to manage risk on an ongoing basis, not just before you give the money. So now we can use data to say, okay, I gave you $10. What did you do with it? Or actually, more realistically, we gave you $50,000. What did you do with it? Okay, we see, because you've integrated with our data systems, that you are you're making a lot of money with that asset. Great. Well, why don't we give you another $200,000 and get a lot more assets? And then that cycle goes on and on and on, and before you know it, you're giving a high growth startup $3 million. So that's exactly what we did with a few of these companies that are our operating partners. There was a company in Uganda, ASAC, who does motorcycle leasing. And we started with an initial, I think, 70K. And they came back and they had great data systems. And they came back and said, hey, this is great. So we gave them more and more money. And now we've signed a deal with them to do 3 million over the course of a year. And that would not be possible through a traditional lending structure. Why? Because that's just not how banks work, right? You finish with a loan, you come back with a loan, and you apply for another loan, and that cycle go over and over again. But because we're using data the whole time, we can assess the business in real time. So when in Uganda, in July, there was a lockdown, we could see their business drop, but we could also see it pop back up in August. So we could make an immediate decision that they were good to finance again in September. So I think that's the big change. And so the market isn't asset financing in Africa. The market is, how do we use data to do better financing globally? So you can imagine data-driven working capital, data-driven inventory financing, data-driven even consumer financing, which is actually quite advanced, although I would argue that it's being abused. But I think if you use data to give businesses more money, that's where the economic drivers really are. Did I answer that question? I don't know if the person can answer
she
or
can't
not.
talk, so I would say yes.
Okay.
So what is your ultimate objective for this this startup that you're working on now? Is it to go public or?
Well, I don't really define our goals necessarily just in terms of what it does for the company. We would like to reach, I personally would like to reach 100 million entrepreneurs globally and deploy annually at least $1 billion to these 100 million entrepreneurs. And I think, people say, well, that's crazy. 100 million, there are not 100 million entrepreneurs out there. Absolutely there are. If you look at Africa, there's 1.3 billion today, and by 2050, there's going to be 2 billion in Africa. Most of that economy runs off of small entrepreneurs, a motorcycle taxi driver, a small merchant on the corner, a woman selling water from her house. They're all entrepreneurs. And most of them face the same problems. It was really funny. I remember I would go out and visit our reseller partners in Haiti all the time. And every time I go visit, so, how's it going? Everything's great. Awesome. What do you need? Money. And I'm like, of course you need money. Everyone needs money. Ha, 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 ha. It took me quite a while to realize, oh, shit, they really do need money. Because if they had more money to buy more inventory, they literally double, triple, quadruple their income. So why aren't we giving them money? Because there's no mechanism to do that. But if there is a mechanism to do it, it's a win for them, a win for investors, a win for the entire economy.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, Katerina has some questions next. Katerina, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for presenting this. It's amazing work that you do, and it's really
Thank you.
great. The question I have, I know that in a lot of the countries, I know mostly from African countries, since I had family from there and so on, that bureaucracy, but also corruption is a huge issue. So how do you check if the money that from the investors doesn't go into huge amounts of just dealing with licenses and the usual, like the very common use of corruption to get licenses and all kinds of.
That's a great question. And so let me answer that question in three levels, if you don't mind. So at one level, I think one of the reasons corruption exists to the extent that it does in many emerging markets is because of the system that's in place. So in many of the markets that we're talking about, money is coming from, I like to joke, it's coming from thin air. It's coming from other government institutions, international aid, the World Bank, UN, and when you have that kind of top-down project capital deployment, there's always corruption. It's not just a cultural thing. I mean, look at the U.S. When you have Halliburton getting a big contract or contractors bidding on highway projects, there is often corruption going on. So the issue is not about, oh, yeah, those people are bad, they're just corrupt. It's the system. When you have a few people managing huge sums of money, the temptation for corruption, the opportunity for corruption is massive. So that's one. And so in our model, we don't do it that way. We don't go from top down, we go from bottom up. And we focus on the asset instead. So instead of giving somebody a big chunk of money and saying, distribute it, we say, that money is going to these assets. And once they're in the asset, we can, because we have real-time data integration with those assets, we can actually see how it's being used. And if we can see how it's being used, we can see how much revenue it's generating. So I'll give you a very specific example of a water treatment system. If we know that XYZ or this water treatment system is producing 10,000 liters of water, well, there better be revenue associated with that 10,000 liters. And in some cases, it even shuts off if it's not being paid for. So that direct data integration creates that grassroots bottom-up accountability that doesn't exist when you come top-down. The second level I'll just describe it. It's again, and I just really want to. I'm not naive in thinking that we're just all good people, and if everybody just had the right incentives, it would be good. But I do think incentives matter. Right? So if you're a government bureaucrat doling out money, what's your incentive? Well, your incentive, I don't know. How are you going to make money? I get paid the same salary anyway. So how do I better my fortune? Maybe I'll ask for some extra money on the side. A business doesn't work that way. A business, well, it does work that way, but it's not corruption, right? It's like, oh yeah, I want to make my customer happy. Okay, great. So I do more things for my customer. They pay me more. That's a very legitimate transaction. So we really try to structure our business models and financing around that model. You provide a service, you get paid for it. The better you provide that service, the more money you make. So your incentive is not to steal the asset to get money on the side. Your incentive is to use that asset as much as possible to make as much money as possible for yourself, which in turn makes as much money as possible for our investors. And then the third level is, simply just on the ground engagement. You got to be there. If you're doling out money from Seattle or New York or Paris or London, all you have are these reports that somebody sends you. You don't know what's going to happen. And if you're financing an NGO, or you're financing somebody to send you a report, Well, so much of that money then goes into the administration of sending you that report. And it sounds stupid and silly, but that's essentially what happens. And in a business model, the report that matters is how much money it's generating, how much money it's generating for the entrepreneur, how much money it's generating for investors. That's what matters. It's easier to track, it's more direct, and ultimately more efficient. Did I answer your question, Katarina?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I wasn't, implying that people are bad. The systems that are put in place are still problems that came back from colonization, and they were systematically done that way. The over bureaucracy, it's crazy, the bureaucracy in some countries. So yeah, thank you so much.
Bureaucracy is crazy. But, and I think you make a really good clarification there. It's not that people are bad, the systems are bad, but, the systems are put there because of the economic disparities that exist in the world. Going back to an earlier question you asked, Cheryl, what is there something in my background that, so my family is Taiwanese, and I look at Taiwan. In fact, there's an interesting story. I have an uncle who I never met because he died when he was 2. It was the 1930s, rural Taiwan, and my grandparents had a son, an older brother to my mother, and he got diarrhea, and he died in my grandmother's arms, waiting for the bus to take him to the hospital. Fast forward 70 years, Taiwan is one of the richest countries in the world by purchasing power parity, and it didn't get there through aid. If it had been given a large amount of aid, I would actually doubt that it would have ever gotten there. It got there because, for various factors, whether intentional or not, small businesses were allowed to thrive. Small businesses were given an opportunity to create opportunity. Small businesses were given the opportunity to make money. Small businesses were given the opportunity to sell globally. And so today, Taiwan manufactures most of the advanced chips that are on the phones or in the phones that we're using to do this Clubhouse chat today. And without that capability, we probably wouldn't even have these phones. Going from 1930s Taiwan to today it's not about top-down distribution of capital. It is about empowering the small individual, about the small entrepreneur to be able to create value by solving real problems on the ground. Because businesses and small businesses will always be more efficient than the larger businesses or large organizations or top-down bureaucracies. So the difference really between, Africa getting its money from the World Bank and Taiwan in the 1950s is really about the structure of the economy and the source of capital, in my view.
Thank you. Jake, you join us on stage. You have a question for Jim?
Hello, good morning. My question is, do you do business for small business here in America? And have you tried water from air technology and seen whether or not it's profitable?
Yeah, so we don't do small businesses in the U.S., not because there isn't a need. I just think that there's a greater need in emerging markets because the capital markets are more broken there. I think there's quite a bit of capital markets innovation in the U.S. You could even argue that one of the first, if you will, inspirations for what we do today was many years ago, seeing what Square was doing. Square, they do point of sale systems, and they were giving instant loans to cafe owners and so on. And I was like, oh, wow, that's really cool. That's using, I didn't use those words then, but they're basically using database lending, instant lending. And interestingly, coming full circle, that's what we do today for merchants in Nigeria. But I think there's quite a bit of innovation, whether that is a company like Pipe that does financing of SaaS subscriptions so that, so Pipe will fund a company that provides a SaaS product, and take the subscriptions and the forward revenues of those subscriptions and give that company some money. That's essentially what we do, but in an emerging market context. So I think my point is here that there's enough innovation. There's quite a bit of innovation in the U.S. And what usually ends up, a lot of what's happening is it's really the junk loans that end up getting that needs or can't get financing. That's a very generalized statement, but I think there's just more opportunity of financing good businesses in emerging markets because even the best businesses can't get financing in Kenya or in Mali. So that's one of the reasons we focus on emerging markets. I think there was a second part of your question that was important as well. What was the second part, Jake?
Yeah, have you tried the water from air technology, say like on a solar panel trailer or something like that, so you be zero emissions and get air or water?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, I just signed paperwork today for a company that I invested in that does almost exactly that. It's called Desolinator, Desolnator. That uses solar panels, uses the heat for the solar panels to distill water and basically do more efficient desalination through that technology. I think that we looked at a whole bunch of companies like that when we were running the systems in Haiti. And it's interesting because I think the use case for water from air is very specific. And at the end of the day, a water operation comes down to the core economics. So, of course, if you're in a desert in the U.S. military, it doesn't matter how much money you spend to get water. You're going to get water. So that technology makes very good sense. If you're in Haiti, where most people live on floodplains, where there's actually loads of groundwater, it's just not clean, using more cost-effective methods to treat water is going to be much better than taking water from air. So, I think there's, excuse me, take a drink of water.
You need to drink some water.
Oh, mm-hmm. Thank you. So I think there's specific applications of water from air that are interesting. And again, this company that I invested in, they did their first deployment in Dubai. The Dubai Water Authority is deploying a system of theirs. It makes sense there because you have to desalinate. You have to get water from air, if you will. But for most applications, and this was a bit of a light bulb when I was driving around random parts of Haiti back in 2010, 2011, is that most places where there are a lot of people, there's already some kind of water, or there has been in the past at least, because otherwise they wouldn't be there. And so for the most part, if you have large populations, generally speaking, there's a water source. Whether the water source is clean or not is another question, but there is a water source. So I am bullish on new technologies like water from air, but I do think that they still have a ways to go in terms of unit economics, and that for the foreseeable future, their application is going to be limited to very specific scenarios, such as water in arid areas or water in very special circumstances.
Thank you. Pat, you join us on stage. You have a question for Jim?
Yes, please, Cheryl. Thank you so much for organizing this room. And thank you, Jim, for all your work and how you've described it on the show tonight. I was listening earlier on, because it's, what you were saying just now, particularly about how there's so many a multitude of opportunities in emerging countries to actually help them develop their improve their investments and develop their technological advances or hopes and aspirations or so on. It reminded me very much of years ago in the 90s, thinking of a young woman I knew in South Africa who all she needed was a fridge. She just wanted a fridge to have soft drinks in, and she was going to sell those in her community and increase her income that way. But you were saying earlier on about microfinancing and how what you do is a step away from that or a step up from that, perhaps. My question was really about what level of investment capital have you been involved with over these recent years to help set up in, say, for instance, South Africa, in technology, perhaps? But I suppose it's really at the grassroots level that you're interested in. Thanks. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to give a plug to one of the companies that we work with, Coolbox, Koolboks. Um, they work in Nigeria and they provide solar powered small fridges to small merchants like the friend that you met in South Africa. And so I'm personally very excited about that because I've seen in Haiti, in South Africa, in Kenya, in Nigeria, of course, that need, right? A merchant just wants an easy way to chill drinks because you can sell a chilled drink for more than a warm drink. Um, so I'm quite excited about that. In terms of the grassroots piece of it, how much we deployed. So overall, if you look at Haiti, if you look at what we're deploying now, um, I've personally deployed over 5 million of my own money to do this kind of work. And so far, in the last 11 months that we've been doing smart asset financing, we've deployed, I believe, over 5 million in cash to these small businesses. So we're not building bridges here. So one refrigerator, like the one I just gave as an example of, that costs a little bit over $1,000. So you can imagine how many of those fridges we can finance. Or a motorcycle in Uganda that costs about 1,300. You can imagine how many we can finance with 3 million. So the amounts of money that can go a long way, it's pretty significant.
What sort of difficulties do you experience in keeping tabs on all those smaller?
Well, so that's where the data comes in, and so going back to your commentary about microfinance, this may sound a little bit geeky or techie, but I'll describe it anyway. At the end of the day, lending comes down to two things: default risk and administrative costs. Right? Default risk meaning, how risky is it, and administrative costs meaning how much is it going to cost you to find the customer, find the borrower, evaluate the risk, and collect money from them, blah 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 blah. And if you look at it in terms of the actual cost of doing that, there's only so much you can reduce. So even in microfinance, if you use the traditional model of lending, well, if you're going to lend $1,000, well, you're still going to have to send a credit officer out. You still have default risk to deal with. How do you manage that? So unless you actually change the game, change the paradigm, and change, if you can reduce the default risk and somehow reduce the administrative costs, well, you're not you can't defy the laws of gravity. And so when we see high interest rates among certain microfinance institutions, oh my God, that's usury, they're exploiting. Yes, there are certainly cases of that. But in many other cases, that's the actual costs of risk and administrative costs. So does that make sense for a small merchant to be paying 50% interest? No, it's not tenable. So we really need to find a different way of managing it. So the way we manage it is, instead of sending a credit officer to every single one of these machines, we actually use the data integration in those machines to track how well that asset is doing. And so instead of using a credit officer saying, hey, Mary, what's your balance sheet? And, let's go through the whole application process that you don't like and we don't like either. We simply say, okay, you're deploying a refrigerator, and because we work with your POS provider, we see that you do X amount of revenue, and you can support that. Boom, we don't even look at it's an instant decision. You get a refrigerator. and we deploy it. And we, using IoT tracking, we can track that it doesn't move. We can track that how often it's being used or not used, and collect money directly from the machine. So now we've reduced default risk and administrative costs using technology so that we can do a lot more of these kind of financings versus sending out a credit officer to every single one of these small merchants, which is not tenable.
Thank you, Jim. Rajashi, you have a question for Jim?
Yeah, I just wanted to, one thing I wanted to bring up was this very interesting model that came out of India where basically group loans, instead of finding three different people to take loans individually and then following up on each of them, you had, say, you have three people coming in for a loan at the same time and they're guaranteeing each other's because
Yeah.
sometimes they're from the same community. So I just want to bring that up. And also, I work with a founder who's behind a product called SunVeg. It's a combination solar and biogas dryer, SunVeg, SUNVEG.in. And it's pretty interesting because it was made for the Indian market where if you don't have solar power, you usually have biogas because we raise cattle. And it's very easily operable. And the dry chain is a very, very promising technology. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's an alternative to refrigeration, which uses much less power and gives you much larger shelf lives. Although dried foods aren't really a common part of our palates in more developed nations, they certainly help stop food spoilage, and there's a lot of applications to it. So I just wondered if I could get in touch with you about this and take it up.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Get in touch. You can get in touch with me through my bio. My social links are up there. I'm on LinkedIn, Jim Chu, CHU, Untapped, or you can email me directly at jim@untapped-global.com. And happy to look at some interesting technologies. We're unfortunately not yet in India, so we probably won't be able to deploy capital there, but we're always interested in new technologies, and maybe we can even bring some of that to other markets like Latin America or Africa.
Thank you. Because I remember in tech news itself, there was a lot of people talking about how, for example, in Thailand, there was a lot of mangoes getting spoiled because you couldn't reach them to the consumer in the heat of the pandemic. So much food gets spoiled. And especially, we find that this product is really good for not just India, but also Africa, where solar and biogas is also readily available. And and this it's just that food loss is really a huge problem in developing nations. Over 30% of the food gets wasted before it reaches our plates. So I think this is a pretty cool market, and it's a large capex machine. And I've really been reaching out to all sorts of impact investors and whatnot. And this model that you've brought to the table, I mean, it's really a game changer. I'm so glad to have the chance to speak.
No, thank you very much. And yeah, no, please get in touch. And you can also find out more about our. We just started today, in fact, a crowdfunding campaign to allow individual investors to get involved with the investments that we're doing and benefit from the growth. So it's on WeFunder. If you're interested, you can go to WeFunder/Untapped Global, and you'll find out more about our model and even have the chance to invest.
Jim, you can actually pin it on top as well, if you want.
Okay.
Yep. Damilale, you are flashing your mic. You have a question for Jim?
Yeah, thanks, Cheryl. Hi, Jim. Good to have you on stage here. I've been listening, and I think your mission is a very valuable mission to the world, especially because
Thank
you're
you.
looking at emerging markets. You're welcome. So my question is, and Rajarshi also just, give a few insights into the food aspect. I'm working on something that's really similar to what you're working on. Within the food industry. And I think it's going to be one of the game changers to, help entrepreneurs coming out of emerging markets such as Nigeria. And I am Nigerian. And last year I was in Nigeria for about 8 months. I was struck by the pandemic, so I couldn't come back to Canada on time. And I observed, you know, what the society was like and how the society got struck when the pandemic came and shocked everyone. One of the major challenges was food, and it was almost turning into a zombie land the way we had people scavenging for food. So I thought to myself, because at that point I was trying to establish a whole different business in fintech, and then I said no, it has to be food, because that's the only way we can actually empower people and change lives and also feed people. So I'm just curious to know what you've been doing in that regard, in case there might be some point where we could synergize. Because
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead, please.
yeah. So I think we haven't done too much directly with food, although there's a couple of related technologies or operating partners and business models we've been looking at. So one is around making smallholder farmers or farming more efficient. And so one of the companies we work with in Kenya, they have a mobile solar powered irrigation system for farmers. So solar irrigation, that's easy to understand, but I think the harder thing to understand is that not every farmer has enough of a plot to justify the capital cost of mechanized irrigation, right? So by creating a pay-as-you-go irrigation system that can be moved from one farmer to another, we're essentially allowing farmers to share an asset effectively, and therefore use a portion of an asset and the benefits of a portion of the asset versus the entirety of that asset. And in more technical parlance, we're increasing the utilization rate of the asset so that we're capturing more of the value, but also making it more affordable for a small farmer to utilize mechanized irrigation. So I'm quite excited about that. That company's in early stages, but I think it has potential of getting mechanized irrigation to a lot more people. The second one that I'm quite crazy about, and I've already mentioned one model that's very similar, which is that off-grid refrigeration. But we've invested in some companies that do solar or thermal, at least, off-grid refrigeration. So refrigeration that essentially, it's off-grid. It's further out into areas that don't otherwise have electricity, and then therefore they can help farmers make their supply chain or keep their produce, keep their products fresher longer, so they can sell it without having to do a distress sale at the end of the day. So those are two fairly exciting ones that I think are interesting. Another one that is, I think, different from what you're talking about, although and technically it doesn't fit into the smart asset financing model, but I've invested in as an equity investor, is an insect protein. So I'm a big believer in insect protein, and as you know, protein is important for diet, and a lot of that can come from obviously animals, but also from things like soybeans and so on. But there is a zero-sum game in terms of what you plant and what protein is available. Insects are a very high protein way of providing protein, a very cost-effective way of providing protein. And so invested in a company called Insectipro, who essentially raises crickets and black soldier fly larvae for producing protein that they use the outside shells as protein for animal feed. And so that displaces the need to use soybeans, for example, to supplement animal feed, and therefore leaves more things like soybeans for human consumption. And of course, there are certain cultures and certain places where direct consumption of insects is interesting. So those are three areas that I personally have been very fascinated by. I think all three have quite a bit of potential for growth.
Well, I think that those are three really great areas. You're looking at crop, you're looking at preservation, and you're looking at technology, which I think is very important in the world in our world today. I'm looking more about the people and the community behind the technology, because what we're doing, we're looking at connecting we're looking at a marketplace that connects food to food creators and food lovers. So technically, if you check my bio, you'd see FFO there. It's for foodies only, but it was coined out from empowering the local chef, to be able to supply their immediate environment and we'll say neighborhood without having to go through the stress. Because if you look at the platforms that we have today, you would have to get food delivered from the restaurant, which is great, but then the cost of that already defeats the purpose of the mission. So the service, the global market, the total global market for this industry is about $305 billion. The serviceable obtainable market in North America is about 20 something $billion. So we're looking at North America to start the platform regionally, or we can say locally, and then we're trying to decentralize in Africa, Nigeria to start with, because we have a good community there. So I don't know if this is something that interests you, and if it is, it could be a way for us to attend to the people of the community behind the technology. And that's what I wanted to share. Thank you.
Always interested to learn more. So please, if you have a deck or have more information, please send it to me.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jim. Good connecting with you. And thanks, Cheryl, for having me on stage.
Likewise.
Thank you. I would just like to ask if Tina or Lavina, you have a question for Jim? Okay, if not, Jim, I'll give you some time to drop any plug that you want.
Well, I think I already mentioned that we just started a public crowdfunding campaign today. What is it? We've been deploying capital and we've been self-funded till today. But in October, we decided to open a round to accredited investors, and we raised $1 million in October. But now we stopped that, and we're opening it up to crowdfunding so that we can give non-accredited investors an opportunity to become equity investors in what we're building. What exactly are we building? So you guys have heard about the smart asset financing model, but what we want to build, and where most of the funding is going to go into, is to build a digital investing platform that allows investors, both accredited and non-accredited investors, to put in check sizes as low as $500 to be able to and have that $500 go into emerging market entrepreneurs, and to get that money back with return in as little as 3 months. So we really want to make impact investing or investing in emerging markets that's something that's easy, profitable, and safe for investors everywhere. And I really see two major trends happening right now. One is this digitalization in emerging markets that we've already talked about, but the other is a whole disruption in how we invest. We've all heard about Robinhood, GameStop, retail investors, moving markets. Well, I think we're going to go beyond that. And there are more and more platforms today that are making asset classes that were only once available to the rich, whether that be venture capital or private equity investments or institutional bonds or even impact investing, making that available to everyone. And so we think that that is a trend that's going to continue to happen over the next 10 years. And we want to be a big enabler to put impact investing, or if you will, investing in emerging markets on the map for your everyday investor. So please go to wefunder.com, Untapped Global, and you will find the information about our crowdfunding campaign there.
Thank you, Jim. And the site that Jim just mentioned is already pinned on top of this room. Just click on it, and you'll be able to reach to the information required. Thank you, everybody. So with that, I would just like to shout out for founders in the room, or if you know any good founder who wants a 1 hour stage like that to share their startup journey and to share their projects, please reach out to me and I'll try my best to arrange a session as soon as possible. And with that, is there anyone on stage with a hot comment for Jim before we wrap the room? Okay, if not,
Well,
thank you very
before
much,
you
Jim.
go, I want to
Yep.
thank you, Cheryl, for hosting these startup discussions every day, and I think these are incredibly valuable to hear from founders. The real story behind what they do, and I really appreciate you inviting me as well.
You're very welcome, Jim. So if you have any founders who you think that need more visibility, be it for traction, fundraising or hiring, just let them reach out to me.
Sounds good. I will.
Thank you. Okay, with that, this room will close in.
Cheryl. Sorry, Cheryl. Just to interject you, I'm sorry to
Go
interject.
ahead.
So, Jim, I do see that you're working on a platform to, help investors, get, potential scouting opportunities to viable companies. I think you should check out a company called, I just sent the link to Cheryl, a company called Find Investors. I think it's by Angel. I mean, it's Angel Partners, but it literally helps the regular entrepreneur, or the basic entrepreneur, find investors. And I think it does a good job because you can select the industry, the location, and the type. I'm not saying this might be something of a direct model that you'd want to use or that you would be using, but you could try it out or see what it's about before. I mean, so it can enable you, also maybe solidify your unique, I'll say your unique value proposition. So that's just what I wanted to add to, to the room before leaving.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So findinvestors.com, is that the URL?
I'll send the URL to you, to your over the back channel. But I already sent to Cheryl. If you'd like to put it up.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'll
Okay.
take a look for sure. Appreciate the suggestion.